Well, this afternoon, we're talking about the debt exchange program. Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta has hinted of plans to modify government's policy on zero coupons for the 2023 financial year. The minister, in an exclusive interview on PM Express Business Edition, which airs tomorrow, revealed that although the debt exchange program is inevitable, government will make a U-turn, possibly on the payment of zero interest payment on returns. Listen to excerpts of that interview.
What are we saying? We are saying that we have a situation where debt exchange is necessary. We have a situation where we have come out of certain formulations and we have gone ahead to discuss with the financial institutions a way to mitigate that. I think we've done that successfully. In the same way we sat with the union pensions, and I think we are making great progress in what we do for them. In the same way in which we are looking at individual bondholders to see how we can tweak this. Would we lose a bit of what we have? I think all of us are going to, but we have to make sure that what we eventually come up with creates a sustainability. For example, a zero coupon for 2023. That has to change. So we'll look at that. And those are the modifications which then recognizes the need for fixed income for certain classes of our citizens that we intend to do. So George, once again, livelihoods must be protected as much as we can, and make sure that we also have a nation as a community that is also strong and robust for the future. So that's a balance that we have to do, and we'll do it successfully.
Well, that exclusive interview is on the Joy News channel tomorrow at 9 p.m. You want to make a date. Let's bring you a breakdown of the implications for you as an individual bondholder. Here are excerpts. So in terms of that payment policy for the whole of 2023, government says it will not pay much money in terms of return on investments for individual bondholders for the period of the 2023 financial year. But it will revise that policy, increase it to 5% by 2024. And then 2025 is the maturity period where government is seeking to pay some 10%. In terms of the anticipated debt reduction, as part of the International Monetary Fund's condition, the whole target is to clear a debt of 137 billion, which will be done in terms of the bond exchange program. And then that may be cutting our cost in terms of public debt by some 30% and moving us all the way to some threshold of 70.02% of the total domestic debts as of September 2020. So that's the base rate at which we're calculating that projection. But what promise is government making to the individual bondholders and by extension the citizenry? The indication is that treasury bills are completely exempt and all holders will be paid full value of their investments on maturity. That is being contended by the group as well. And government is also giving assurances that there will be no haircuts. As to whether or not that will be the case, well, in terms of definition, it's subject to controversy as well. But it's a firm assurance coming through from government, including the president himself, that we may not get a haircut on the principal of the bonds. And the final phase has got to do with the individual bondholders not being affected. We know that that third point is what is clearly not the case on the ground as we speak, and for which the finance minister is today engaging them, trying to adopt what he says is a burden sharing approach. So based on that last point not being fulfilled, there are projections that government may not stick to their promises in terms of the other two requirements. I want to bring in now Mona Quartey. She's a former Deputy Minister for Finance, understand what's happening to our economy as we speak, and has some thoughts on what's happening. Later on, we'll get in touch with Richard Kwame Frimpong, who's a financial analyst. Mona Quartey, welcome to The Pulse. It's such a pleasure to be speaking to you. Happy New Year. You would have to unmute as you make the point, but what do you see happening now that, of course, a crunch meeting is underway? The finance minister says some losses would have to be made on the part of government. What's your expectation as these negotiations begin?
Since I was on mute, let me greet you again. Happy New Year blessing, and to your viewers, good afternoon. Ahead of today's meeting, I know that most people are feeling very anxious, uncertain about what exactly will happen to their treasury bills and to their bonds. Yes, there's been talk of no haircuts on the principal. That is good enough. But I think most people bought these instruments as part of their treasury cash management, and it was to earn interest because we all know that inflation is over 50%. Therefore, at least to earn some interest to keep part of the value of your investment. Therefore, when you're told that there's no haircut on principal, that's fine. But what about the cut on the interest? And as you just said, the Minister of Finance spoke about no interest in 2023, 5% in 2024, and 10% thereafter. That is nowhere near inflation. I mean, really doesn't maintain the value of the investment. So we hope that this afternoon the minister will speak to the issues and unpack them. Why is this happening? We know the greater goal of trying to reduce debt in order to go into an IMF program. We know it's about debt restructuring, and that is fine. But it is how it is done that is a big issue. How did we get to where we are in the first place so that we all understand that as we are even burden sharing? Why do we individuals have to burden share? And at this point, with the way the government has communicated its plans to us in terms of domestic debt restructuring, we are all feeling that it's a big no to this debt restructuring as it is being proposed, without giving us a chance to also give our thoughts on how it could be better, a win-win for the debt restructuring and also for our investments as people. Economics is a social science. It's about people. Our cost of living is going up. February 1, we are going to see a hike in utility rates. We also have massive inflation. The value of our currency is not the same. It's gone down, it's depreciated. Therefore, as a people, we are struggling to live. Our standard of living has gone down. Our cost of living has gone up. So this afternoon's meeting with the Minister of Finance must unpack the issues and explain to us that in as much as we are trying to reduce the debt burden of the nation, how will we, the people, survive under the current recommendations that they are making? People, number one, as I said, losing interest is going to be major for us. In terms of institutions, the banks, what is going to happen to those banks? We have our current accounts and some of our savings with those banks. If some of those banks go down because they don't meet the capital adequacy ratio, then there's a problem for us as people. Two, people as pensioners. What will happen to the pension funds? I mean, we hear they've been exempted. We hear that the banks may be exempted. We don't know yet. But those exemptions still will create cash flow management for the institutions and subsequently to us as individuals. So it's like we are hit on all sides. It's important that government consults with the people through institutions, through representatives, the MPs, through the banks, through the associations, through the trade union, and have a better way to resolve this issue. I don't think that the IMF is asking government to make its people miserable. It is asking government to do the things, do its homework in terms of expenditure rationalization. What signals are government sending to us when they say that we should burden share, but yet we don't see a cut in government expenditure? I mean, everyone has been talking about this, finance and non-finance people. It is simple. Cut government expenditure, starting from Jubilee House all the way down to the ministries, all political appointees, those who don't need to be there, rationalize and keep only those that you need. Come down to bare basics, and then you are signaling correctly, and then you can ask for burden sharing. I'm sure every Ghanaian wants to help Ghana to get back on its feet, but that can only be done if the right signals are sent to us. Not when you are taxing us some more without any growth, not when you're hiking our cost of living, and then now you're asking us to burden share. That is unfair. I believe, Blessing, that at this point, we have totally destroyed our culture of savings. Everyone knew that these were risk-free instruments, and government has all willy-nilly just gone out and started making unilateral decisions concerning these things.
And what I want us to do next will be to explore the alternatives, because the argument has been put forward that government is in a tight corner. We can't find any alternative aside what's happening now, which is the debt exchange program. But even before we do that, we're getting a sense of what may happen at the end of the day when the negotiations go through. The government will indeed revise its policy on the zero coupons for 2023. If government pushes through the approach on individual bondholders, at least this is some respite, isn't it?
Blessing, this piecemeal approach to resolving the issue of debt restructuring is very worrying. It tells us that the Ministry of Finance and the government as a whole don't know what they are doing. And that is serious, because that makes us all anxious. These are people who were elected and then appointed into office and are being compensated to do this job. And yet, on a daily basis, they keep making U-turns and, struggling to come up with any consistent policy on this debt restructuring. The alternative, which we have said over and over again for almost 2 years now, is expenditure control and rationalization by the government. This government has shown that they spend recklessly, they borrow recklessly, and they don't keep accounts of government revenue and expenditure. They have bypassed the gift miss system several times. I mean, we all know that there's been essential at some point, essential for motion to remove the minister, all because of these things. The first and foremost signal is for government to rationalize government expenditure. That will send the right signals. Then people can come to the table to discuss alternatives. But when we don't see that, what are we bringing alternatives for? It means we are bringing alternatives to people who will not even listen. People who really don't care, but just want to place the burden on us. So that is not acceptable. Now, this U-turn on interest for this year will not really help, honestly, because you are hiking the cost of living through hike rates for utilities and so forth. You are also taxing people more. You are talking about property taxes and so forth. These are all not bad things in good times, but unfortunately, we are all in bad times. The government can therefore not burden share at this time. They are going to have to discuss what the real issues are with both individuals and institutions, CSOs, banks, pension funds, everyone actually, and then come up with a plan that is acceptable to all. This is what we are saying. We are saying come up with a plan that is acceptable, but don't unilaterally try to come up with a plan, then almost every day make changes to it. You are succumbing to, just pressure from everyone who is suffering. And that is an indication that your plan is not good. So therefore, come out with a better plan that can be better discussed.
We're all looking for the solutions. So you may be of help at this moment. The argument we've heard from your side and by extension from those who belong to the NDC is cut the cost. But many say a lot of water has gone under the bridge. We're looking for solutions now. We're in a tight corner as a nation. So where do we start from, aside the cost-cutting measures?
We start from engaging everyone. And that is why even the MPs in opposition, as it were, the opposition party, the NDC, have decided that they will go on a road show and explain what is going on. Now, this is what happens when government does not explain properly what is going on. Therefore, the opposition will do its work for it. So the first step is to explain to everyone what is really going on and why we need this debt restructuring. At that point, people will be more open to being able to burden share with government. But the first thing is the signal from government that they are cutting expenditure. And then we can all come together as a nation and try to burden share.
What's the argument? What's the argument there? That the measures announced by the finance minister in the last budget, which will obviously take effect this year, is not sufficient. Is that the argument you're making? We've seen a directive. We've seen a directive on hampers. I mean, state-owned vehicles would not be moved within town if they are V8 engines, and a raft of measures being announced by the finance minister, including cutting flights or, conferences in the public sector. These are huge items that drain the public purse, you agree? It's all being taken off as part of the austerity plan. So where do we cut further?
Let's look at the numbers. We are talking about a total of 137 billion Ghana cedis domestic debt. Okay, 60 billion of which is with the financial institutions in terms of bills and bonds. That is not going to be reduced by what you've just said as shown in the budget. It's going to need serious government expenditure cuts. And it will start with even administrative, the number of political appointees, the number of people working in the president's office, in Jubilee House, all the way into the ministries, even the Ministry of Finance, the number of people working there, the perks that they are collecting. Then to the kind of lower down costs that you just mentioned, travel and so forth. But even more so, if I recall, Vice President Mahmoud Bawumia had spoken about cutting corruption and be able to make so much money from cutting corruption. We haven't seen that happen. Perhaps this is a good time for that to start happening as well. I think if we are able to cut expenditure, reduce corruption, reduce the number of people on government payroll, we should be able to then burden share less than what is being expected now. And there has to be consistency in the debt restructuring policy that the minister is referring to. It's almost like every morning we wake up to a tweak or a change in the debt restructuring policy. There has to be some consistency. Ghanaians are suffering at this time, and government needs to factor that into what plan they eventually come out with.
At least government is desperate now. They need the funds. They need the IMF program. What do you see happening to that policy if we suffer a setback in the debt exchange program? Do you see the IMF cash arriving in the first quarter of this year as projected by government?
I don't see that happening. Blessing. First and foremost, we must pass the debt sustainability assessment. I don't even see this debt restructuring being done by the end of first quarter 2023. That is not going to happen. What we need to do is to spend time to resolve these issues properly. There is no rush to come up with a solution that will fail. Let us rather spend time on coming up with a solution that will be sustainable and that will last and that will not hurt our people. What is governance about? Governance is about making sure that our people live fairly well, have a decent standard of living, and are not, under stress. Therefore, it is important that we look at this whole debt restructuring properly, and there must be consensus. This can only be done through proper engagement. The ministry and the government, for that matter, cannot make such decisions for all of us. As for the IMF, you must pass in order for them to help you. So how do we pass? That is the question we must ask ourselves, not start to push debt restructuring in the current form down our throats.
And we're already turning to unconventional, I'm using that word, international lenders. We're learning that, for instance, government is seeking to turn to China as part of the solution. Negotiations are underway. We're not too clear about the details. But what would that mean to, our long-standing relations with the West and how they've funded our activities? Now turning to China may pose some new risks to us, isn't it?
Blessing, let's get serious about where we borrow from. Borrowing from the West is based on risk-reward profile. The riskier you are, the higher your interest rate. And then you get into the debt distress that we are in now. And as for them, they are also not a charity and they are not given free money. China is also not a charity and given free money. They will also prize the money that they will give to you. it boils down to negotiations. I don't think at this point we should be discriminating where we get funds from, but we should be looking at negotiating these funds properly. If you recall, we borrowed money from China to build the Ghana gas plant, and that has worked very well. We intended borrowing 3 billion, we ended up borrowing only half of that. Borrow what you need and negotiate the price. If you can get funding at a good cost from China, so be it. And also check your terms. Make sure that your terms are good for you as a nation, not for the lender, but for you as the borrower, and see if that will work. But I think even before we go borrowing, first of all, we need to clean up our balance sheet, number one, as the IMF has asked us to do. We need to manage our expenditure properly, cut our coats according to our size, and we need to allocate resources to our people properly. Because up until now, all we've seen is allocation of resources to areas that are not priority for our growth, for our development.
Okay.
Our government has failed us in that area. And I don't think that they should even be going to negotiate any further loans for us. They failed miserably.
Mona, we have just a minute to go. If someone walked up to you, I mean, an individual bondholder asking you, well, I'm confused. What do I do at this moment? What message do you have for such a person?
My message is simple. Don't agree to exchange your current terms with the terms that are being offered now. First of all, those terms are even fluid. They keep changing every day, so they are unknown. Don't make a change for what you know for what you don't know. And blessing, even as I say that, I ask the government to be careful in how they restructure our debt, because the private sector, which clearly is the engine of our nation's growth, is going to suffer massively. People are going to lose their money, their capital. They will not be able to do their business. They will not be able to pay their workers. And we are going to have a further meltdown from where we are now. So please, Mr. Minister of Finance, think carefully, engage, consult, and come up with a plan which will definitely involve some burden sharing that is acceptable to all of us. We all want better Ghana.
Right. The conversation is just starting. Mona Quartey, I'm grateful for your time here on The Pulse. We'll meet once more and dialogue about this as it unfolds. Thank you.